I'm Mitch Hudson, and you are listening to the Tim and Josh Show. Let's go. I'm on Do Not Disturb. I'm all yours.
So, what was the inspiration for the show and how did you get started with the project?
The Promised Land came from. I went to Liberty University, and there's another student there named Sydney, and she'd had the concept for this show. Hey, let's do The Office, but it's Moses, right? And so, a friend of a friend, a producer who I knew, came to me and was like, hey, we have this concept. Do you think you could make a TV show out of it? And I was like, okay, let me check it out. Let me look back and reread some of these stories about Moses and see, what makes sense to tell it in this style, with it being like a documentary, but following the ancient Hebrews and their story. And I was like, where do you even start if you are to do this? You have to kind of find like an in for something like this. And I
Mhm.
rediscovered the story of when Jethro comes and visits Moses, and he's like, hey, this is how you need to lead, and this is how you're doing it wrong, and this is what the right way to do it would be. And it's basically about delegating and trusting others to help you lead with you. And I was like, okay, great. This feels like this could be a great jump off point for a show about leadership and about how frustrating it is and funny it is, and especially when you're trying to lead a nation that does not want to be led. And the people who are helping you are your brother and sister who are equally ill-equipped to be leaders as you are. And that was kind of the formation for me of like the show and what exists today.
So, you guys talked about it being Moses. Was there ever any talk about it being any other biblical story, or was it just always Moses from the get-go? Was it ever
It
considered to
was
be Daniel or something?
That's a good question. Yeah, it was pretty much always considered to be Moses. Yeah, to me, just Moses makes sense because Moses has a very clear, a lot of biblical stories are kind of like snapshots. Like they're
Hmm.
like, we get to see a character, but in this like very specific moment. And then we see them again maybe later on. Like you mentioned Daniel, right? Of course, you can think about Daniel in the lion's den. You can think about his various prophecies and the ways that he, spoke to the people who were in charge of that time. But you usually just have like kind of check in, check out for a lot of different biblical characters. With Moses, what's great is that you really get a sense of time and of scale and a sense of the clear problem of the people don't want to be here and the clear multiple instances of an attempt at leading these people that leads to failure, pretty much over and over throughout 40 years. So you kind of have this like, okay, we have a timeline. We have, a setting, we have all these things that we know work, and that's what usually makes a sitcom work because you're like, all right, we're still going to be here in the desert, and this week, this is what's going to happen. We're not quite that episodic, but, for lack of a better term, that kind of, I think, works really well for Moses' story.
How long do you have the show mapped out? Are you going to the death of Moses? Are you going past the death of Moses where they actually enter into the promised land? What's your plan?
Yeah, so I want to do 40 episodes and a feature. That's kind of been our
Ooh,
our goal, right? So we've
okay.
done the
Hmm.
pilot. So there's 39 more to go. Five of them come out in October. And I want to do basically all of the story of Moses. So I'd love to get to the point. Ideally, the show would basically end with the beginning of Joshua taking over
Hmm.
from Moses. And
Mm.
that would be kind of our end off point. But we're telling the story of Moses almost start to end, although our show does start with them already in the desert. But that's what the movie would be before. The movie would go back and tell Moses's kind of origin before he left and before they crossed the Red Sea.
Gotcha.
So we'd fill in all the gaps.
So the series ends with Joshua, and then you have like a prequel feature. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, but the movie might come out somewhere in the middle of it. It might not be
Okay.
quite. We might not wait all the way till the end. We'll see how it all goes. But yeah, currently, we do. Egypt is such a important thing that's in kind of their rearview mirror at this point in the story. So for me, it makes sense to occasionally get glimpses of what that looked like. We see, no spoilers, but we see a small piece of a glimpse of their Egyptian life in season one. If we get to make more seasons, you'd get to see a little bit more of that each time.
So 40 episodes, how many seasons is that going to be stretched across?
Yeah, probably five. It should be about five seasons. That's the hope.
Okay.
So season one, 6 episodes. We'd kind of add an episode every season, more or less, to get to 40. Depends on how it all shakes down, and if people are still watching, great. We'll make all five. If it's looking continuous, maybe we'll do three or four and just kind of cram them in. But no, I think we should be able to do 5 seasons with 40 episodes spread across them.
What are some of your goals for the show in terms of like cultural impact or even the impact on Christian media in general? What are some things that you're hoping that the Promised Land will do?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Yeah, I mean, I would love to be in a space where we are providing kind of a faith-based comfort show the way that a lot of these sitcoms are.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like when you've had a bad day, sometimes it's great to sit down and watch something meaningful like The Chosen that has a lot of great dramatic value and can kind of be a comfort to you in terms of being able to hear Jesus speak, right? But sometimes you want to kind of unplug and just watch something funny, mostly light, kind of relax like that. And I'd love for the Promised Land to exist like that within the faith-based space where it's like, hey, what are you going to put on while you're doing your laundry? Watch The Promised Land. You've maybe seen it before. You have it in the background. It's kind of light and it
Yeah.
is a comfort to you. But no, in terms of bigger impact than that, right? I want The Promised Land to be a funny show that is also very authentic, right?
Hmm.
And so if you have grown up with scripture, if pretty much everyone in America at least has some familiarity with the Bible, whether or not it's the center of your faith or just something that you grew up with or something that you've heard of, right? We all have a familiarity with it. It would be great to be a show that's like, hey, if you know only a little bit, you can still get something great out of this. But if you know a lot, then it's so rewarding because you know the characters, you know where they're going to go, you know where it's going to lead to. You can kind of see around the corner of the show as we go. And hopefully we relate to the characters along the way. I'd love to be a comedy show where we see ourselves in Moses and Miriam and Aaron and the whole family. And we can kind of see how God used them back then and God still uses imperfect people today.
Is that hard combining the slapsticky, the office type of comedy with the heart? What's the process of combining those two kind of different type of vibes?
Yeah, it's actually not as hard as it probably sounds because I think what really makes the show work is we are grounding the show in reality, right? The goal of our production design, of how we cast, of how I write, all of it is leading to trying to make a world that feels real and full and like these are real people that existed. And that's what makes it work as a documentary, right? The documentary aspect of the show wouldn't work if you didn't believe the characters. If it didn't feel like real people in a real situation, you wouldn't buy it, right? So the comedy really comes from getting to know the characters and seeing their idiosyncrasies clash, seeing the situational aspects, the relational aspects create this conflict that's usually very funny, right?
Mm.
But because we are grounded in reality and we're character driven, when the characters are going through something that hurts, or they're going through something that is going to grow them, or they're going through something that, at the moment they don't understand it, but they're trying their best to get through it, right?
Hmm.
Because we're based around how they are feeling. When they are feeling something that hurts, the show is not like, haha, look, Moses is having a bad day. It's mostly
Yeah.
like, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Because in that sense of the perspective of our show, when they're hurting, we're hurting. But when they're having daily life problems, that's when it's funny. And so for me, the tone is just very much dependent on what's happening on screen. And so that's why for me, it wasn't actually that far of a reach because I knew I have to get the scripture right. It has to be authentic. It has to work. It
Yeah.
has to be true to the source material. And if I'm staying true to it, and the only thing I'm filling in are the gaps of the daily life aspects, then when I hit those big benchmarks in the Bible, it's
Hmm.
probably going to feel very real and very heart driven because usually that's what is happening in those scenes. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yes.
Many people have tried mockumentaries with no success, almost like they're trying to replicate The Office.
Right.
What makes The Promised Land different from that? And I guess my question is, how is it that The Promised Land has become, in my eyes, so successful than all the other mockumentaries?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one important thing is that we are not a one-to-one like rip of The Office, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm not trying to take biblical characters and cram them into
Yeah.
pre-existing characters from other shows, right? Like I'm not trying to be like, oh, like to me Moses is not Michael Scott. Like I'm not trying to
Right.
draw that comparison. Moses is Moses. He just happens
Hmm.
to be in this documentary world. I think what a lot of people get wrong when they're trying to make a mockumentary is that they do try to invoke those other shows. They're like, oh, I need to have a Dwight. I need to have a
Mm.
Jim and Pam romance. I need to have all these kinds of things. We don't have that. We don't have a romance in our show. It doesn't really make sense at the moment for our show because all the characters are older and married. And
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, well, that's not really the type of show that we're doing. It's really just that we're taking that element of the form of The Office, not the writing of The Office. It's that form of we're with a camera crew trying to capture everything that's happening in the moment. We shoot it in a way that tries to make it feel like it was captured live, because that's
Yeah.
what these shows feel like. But
Right.
I'm not trying to be the office with a biblical skin on it. And I think that's what a lot of people miss
Hmm.
is they're trying to be too close, I think, to those other shows. If anything, we teeter on being too far from them. There are times in the shooting of this show where, you set up a shot, you're like, man, it looks great. And you're like, it shouldn't look great. You know what I mean? Like we got to make this feel more like a mockumentary. You know what I mean? It needs to feel a little looser. And I'm always telling the camera guys, like, you got to settle into it as if you just got there. You know what I mean? It needs to, if we miss focus for a second, great. If anything, we teeter a little bit closer to narrative, but I try to fight that to get us
Yeah.
back into the right space.
The Promised Land is not your first project. You've done stuff for The Chosen and for other things. How has The Promised Land differed from those other projects?
Yeah, so I work as an assistant director on a lot of productions, and The Chosen being the most successful of all of those, and my favorite that I've worked on. The Chosen I've worked on since season one back in 2018. The same job this whole time, which has been awesome. I direct all the background actors on that show. I work really closely with Dallas and the whole team just to make it all come to life. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of similarities between The Chosen and The Promised Land. And it's kind of no accident, I think, that we get compared to The Chosen a lot because I wanted that. After working on The
Hmm.
Chosen for a few seasons, we done 3 seasons of The Chosen before we shot the pilot of The Promised Land. And by that point, I'm in this space where I'm seeing people who are taking scripture and they're trying to be, as Dallas often talks about, to be authentic and to be grounded in the same way that The Promised Land is, right? They're trying to get all the details right so that the story can shine through. And that's what I wanted to do with The Promised Land as well. I wanted to make sure that we don't miss the details of what their lives would have been like, and we try to make it as real as possible. Now, of course, the biggest difference is in the layers of separation between us and the character, right? The Chosen is trying to make you unaware of the camera, right? If you're thinking about the cool shot, one, you're probably a film nerd like myself, or two, something has happened that has kind of gone wrong. Like you usually aren't thinking about the shots when you're watching a show like The Chosen because you're thinking about the characters, you're thinking about the story. For our show, we're drawing a great deal of attention to the camera work because that's kind of what makes this show work. So it creates separation because you're thinking, I'm watching a documentary.
Yeah.
But I think it also brings a closeness because the people in the documentary are talking directly to you. And so it's almost like it almost contradicts itself a little bit. We get to be closer to them because they're talking right to us, but we also have this middle ground of there's a doc crew that's following them around. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I say that's probably the chief difference, right? Is it's not so much in the heart as much as it's in the expression of the show.
What was the process of writing all the scripts? How long did that take? And who's all on the writing team?
It's just me. At least for season one, it was
Oh,
just me,
wow.
which is so
Wow.
intimidating. There's a lot to get right and a lot that you can get wrong. It took me about 3 months to write the new episodes. So we'd already done the pilot, right? I wrote the pilot in probably about 2 weeks. Once I reread that story about Jethro, it kind of really, it's not, I don't think over spiritualizing it to say that it felt like God just put it on my heart. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, let me try it. Let me just see if I can do this, get it right, all that. And then when we were preparing for season one, I knew I had to write 5 more episodes to finish out the season. And it took me about 3 months. A lot of that was preparation. I'd kind of had a loose outline of what I would do in season one, but originally it was going to be longer. Like we were thinking about doing a 10 episode first season, which would have been too expensive, but also it would have had a different stopping place. And I
Mm.
really, you'll see in season one, small spoilers, but I think it's okay. We basically go to the end of Exodus in season one. So we go to when the tabernacle has been built. And for me, at the moment the tabernacle is finished, I was like, that feels like our finale for season one. And if you only get
Yeah.
one season, I hope it's a good one. But so I wanted to feel like, it could end here. It hopefully is not going to end here, right? But if you're going to end somewhere, let's end on this kind of moment of holiness and celebration that happens once they've built the tabernacle. Anyway, so I knew those were kind of my parameters. And so then it was a matter of going through and saying, okay, what is our focus, right? Our focus in season one is on the leadership, right? It's taking what we learned from Jethro and going through how does it work to lead the nation when you're not doing it yourself, when Aaron is also in charge and Miriam is in charge. And,
Mm.
Moses appoints chiefs and elders to help him lead the nation as well. And so kind of all of the decisions were like, what are the stories in between here? I don't want to miss anything. My hope with the show is that I literally capture more or less every story.
Mm.
Even if they're really small, really big, whatever they are, I want to capture most of them, whatever kind of feels like it makes sense and fits into the show. And so I was trying to look at all those and connect them through that through line of leadership. And it was honestly a lot of fun. It was cool to be able to go back and rewrite for these characters, having done the pilot.
Mm.
And, I can write and hear their voices. And I'm like, okay, this is what Joshua sounds like. This is what Korah sounds like. And Cece and all these different characters. I'm writing with kind of their performance in mind. And
Mm.
it was a very, honestly, fulfilling experience doing the writing of season one.
Will each episode have a lesson pertaining to leadership or?
That's a good question. I don't know that each lesson is, or sorry, each episode is quite lesson driven. I think it's a little bit more, every episode has a moment of heart in it.
Mm,
Some of them are lessons. Some of them are people learning something. Some of them are characters who are growing. Some of them are moments of failure or moments of
mm,
fear. So some of them, it's not quite as direct as being a lesson. Though that's a great insight into what this is. Sometimes it's a little bit more like we're on a journey with these people, and sometimes
mm.
they fail, and sometimes it kind of hurts for a minute.
Relatability.
Yeah, and well,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
sometimes that moment of failure is not even something that they did wrong. It's just like, man, I was hoping this would work out and it just didn't. You know what I mean? And so that
Yeah.
sometimes that's there I'm sure there are lessons in that, but mostly we're just kind of they all kind of have a moment where it's like, and then it gets, they overcome or they come through it or they, try to resolve it by the next one, I guess.
Well, you said you were doing it for 3 months. You were writing the story for 3 months.
Yeah,
Was that, oh, I'm going to a log cabin? Or is that like I
I
wrote that
wish.
in the evenings after did The Chosen?
No, yeah, I certainly have done that. There's actually a movie coming out in February called Still Hope
Hmm.
that I co-wrote the script of that. I kind of came on to do rewrites of it before they filmed. That one I did all the writing of while I was on set on The Chosen. I was
Oh my
coming
goodness.
home or on the weekends and I was like, just trying my best to, and it's a totally different movie. It's not a funny movie. It's a very serious kind of beautiful story. But anyways, yeah, I did that while I was on set. No, thankfully for the Promised Land, I was able to do all the writing in a
Mm.
gap. It was, I just finished a project and The Chosen had not started back up again this would have been going into season 5. And so from January to March, and I went to The Chosen at the end of March, I got a chance to just kind of sit at home and write, which is great. And so I'm writing like in our room, in the living room. I'd go out and sit in like a coffee shop or whatever. Honestly, I think I've done most of the writing of this show in Starbucks, just in a corner somewhere, just talking to myself because I'm saying all the dialogue as I'm writing it. Just looking like a crazy person. If you ever are at a Starbucks, there's a good chance you might see me in a corner just like, "Oh, Moses, how old are you today?" Just doing all these silly characters.
In each episode, there's a moment of heart. There's a
Mhm.
lot of comedy shows that more or less don't have a heart. Do you think that heart is important in a comedy, or do you think that in some instances a comedy can get by without really much of a heart?
I think it depends on the premise of the show, right? Like there are definitely some comedy shows that I love that never, I mean, think about Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld
Hmm.
never had hugs and, whatever. It was
Yeah.
just funny the whole time. And I love
Yeah.
that show. The perspective of that show is very much, it's trying to kind of focus in on the foibles of everyday life and how frustrating it is to get the wrong coffee order or, whatever it is. The focus is a
Yeah.
little bit different, right? I think it
Right.
depends on the show. And because our show is so rooted in telling this biblical story and also trying to relate to these people who are very faith driven. I think naturally, I know in my life as a believer, like there are definitely days where I have hardship, and there are days where it's like tough and it's hard to get through. And I think when the focus is on trying to relate to people like this, it naturally lends itself to having those heart moments. And I do think that having moments of kind of heartfelt sincerity makes the comedy funnier because
Mm.
you can kind of see a difference between like what it feels like when it does hurt and when it is a low moment
Hmm.
versus when it's a low moment but it's funny. Does that kind of make sense? It's like
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the heart makes the comedy funnier, and I think the comedy makes the heart more meaningful.
Mm,
And it just makes it a more well-rounded show. Some of my other favorite comedies, I think, do that. Even The Office kind of did that sometimes.
Mm.
You think about when Pam had her art show, and like no one showed up, but then Michael Scott shows up and he's trying to buy
yeah.
them. It's like you can't watch that scene and not cry.
Yep.
And it's just a moment. But those moments mean everything when you're watching a show that's mostly funny.
Right.
Yeah.
What were some of the hardest scenes to either adapt or just write in this first season? Like, it was like, holy,
Mm.
how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this funny?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, easily the hardest one to do was the golden calf. When we get to the golden calf in our show, I knew that I wanted it to be serious because, again, there's not a lot of room for that to be funny in the Bible. It's a moment that hurts for Moses, it hurts for Aaron, it hurts for everybody who is involved in that. It's funny at times leading up to that, right? Like before Moses arrives, and it's the whole process of making this, and everyone is participating in it. There's certainly some humor in there, but once everything kind of hits the fan and you realize what these people have done, I knew it was going to be a serious moment, but it's really hard to figure out how serious for this show. Because in the Bible, what happens is they have the golden calf, and Moses says, "Okay, we're going to go and we're going to kill everyone who was involved in this." And he and
Yeah.
the people from Levi, the Levites, they all get their swords and they go through the camp and they kill like 3,000 people. And then everyone gets a plague. And Moses also like made the people drink the idol. It's a very brutal kind of story in terms of just a little bit like the wrath of Moses in that moment, justifiable wrath, but
Right.
still it's hard. And I was like, I don't know that I can go that hard in this show and come back from it. I can be serious, but I can't be, let's go through the camp and kill
Right.
people serious, right? So for me, that story was a really tough one to figure out. How do we show enough without tipping over into a place that we can't come back from as a mostly lighthearted show?
Yeah.
That was a real challenging one for me. A second example would be some stories are so microscopic that they don't work to have a whole episode about them, but I still
Mm,
want to do them. And so it's like, okay, how do I sneak this into this episode, but not
hmm
dwell on it and make it the focus of a plot line? You know what I mean? Because I
Right.
still want to do them, but I was like, okay, how do we do this? I don't have maybe a specific example for that, but just small things, right? Like when they say that the people brought too much for the tabernacle, and so they had to make an announcement like, hey, don't bring any more. I was trying to see if
Mm.
there was something funny that I could really nestle in on that and maybe do a longer stretch of a bit. I had this idea of like, oh, they're like enforcing no one can give anymore. And it was like a whole thing, which was very funny, but I tried it and it just got so in the way of everything else that was going
mm.
on that it's like, all right, this can be part of a montage and we can just move on. So decisions like that can be challenging.
Why do you think nobody has ever done this before? Because when I heard the concept of the show, I'm like, oh, of course. Why
Right.
hasn't this been done
Yeah.
like 10 years ago?
Right.
Yeah.
I had the thought too, and someone when it was brought to me, I was like, doesn't this exist? And then it's like, no, it kind of doesn't. But I think people did so much of the it's this, but it's The Office, right? Like I had even some friends in college who were like, it's The Walking Dead, but it's The Office, or like you try a bunch of these different things to kind of fit it into that framework. Yeah, I don't know. I think truly one, it takes commitment to do this well. Like it'd be so easy to make a really cheap version of this show where it's like the tints are just like REI tints and we just shoot it at like, some beach or just like, not even worry about the desert aspect. Just like, oh, we're shooting outside and everyone's wearing cheap clothes or whatever. You just go for the jokes, right? But it doesn't work because again, you really have to make it feel real. And the only way for it to
hmm
feel real is for all the details to be right. You know what I mean? Like they still, even when they did The Office, right? The Office could be made fairly cheaply because you can just get an office space. You can't just find the tribe of Judah nowadays. You know what I mean? Like you have to build that and it takes a bit of a budget and it takes a lot of effort to assemble what you need to do it well. I would imagine that that's probably why it hasn't been done yet, right?
Hmm.
In addition to the fact that people have a hesitation with comedy when it comes to faith.
How did you balance the comedy and Bible so well?
It was a lot of having internal rules for writing. Like I knew that the Bible needed to be real in our show. We there are things that we don't make fun of, right? We're not making fun of God. We're not making fun of faith. We're not making fun of the big picture of what this is. Like our show says that the Lord God is real, that he chose these people, and that they are on this journey because they're being led by him. All of that is like fact. That's like an unquestionable part of this show
Mm.
because it's part of their reality. So once you kind of have that rule, everything else about the comedy is people centered, and
Mm.
people are funny. We're
Yeah.
reverent of scripture, but we're irreverent about people because they're just people. This is not Jesus, who is God and man. These are just people. And all they did was make mistakes. And that's where it's like, if the comedy is focused on the people, then it's going to work within the context of the Bible because
Mm.
everything else we're letting be real and serious.
You said that the first season is going to go over Exodus. So I'm assuming that means the Ten Commandments because he comes down. Are we going to be following Moses as he gets the Ten Commandments, or is it we're going to go with the POV of the tribe and like, wow, man, he's off somewhere. I don't, is he dead? Or
Right. A big part of this, of another internal rule, when we're talking about the rules of the show, is that I never have the documentary crew go somewhere that they can't go.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
so when Moses goes up on the mountain, it's just Moses and Joshua, right? So I can't follow them because otherwise it breaks the whole idea of it just being Moses and Joshua who go. Same with
Yeah.
like the documentary crew can never see the Holy of Holies because they never be permitted inside the inner tent of the tabernacle. So that's kind of where we sort of draw lines of where we of what we can show and whatnot.
What was the inspiration for having Moses's children be invisible?
Yeah, so the boys, yeah, where are they? The boys, it's funny because we basically almost never hear about Moses's kids in scripture.
Hmm.
Like we know Gershom and Eliezer. Every now and again you'll hear tell of them, but most of the time they're kind of like the sideiest of side characters in scripture. So you never really get a sense of Moses as like a dad, other than the story where Zipporah takes her firstborn's foreskin and touches it to Moses's feet. That's technically the closest we get to like
Yeah.
contact between Moses and his sons in the
Yeah.
scripture. We don't get a lot of details about that. But so there's part of it that's a little bit of a inside joke, if you will, on like the fact that Moses's kids hardly ever show up in the Bible. The second thing, I'll tell you guys this, but it's our secret, and the listener. We were making the pilot. I was like, man, I just don't want to mess around with having either kids or having, however,
Mm.
his kids would probably actually be adults. But I just don't want to mess around with that element. So I was like, they're just somewhere around here. We just don't see them. Maybe they're over there. Where are they? I don't know. That was kind of the decision for me, at least.
This is my favorite character
Oh, good. I'm
in the
glad.
pilot. Yeah. How did you come up with Kasisi?
So Chasisi, for me, I really wanted to have this kind of insert character that's not part of the tribes, right? Like what's great about having this Egyptian who just happened to wash ashore on the wrong side and is now trying to blend in with all of the Hebrews. I really wanted to have someone that we could see the world through their eyes and they don't know anything. When they see these supernatural elements, Chasisi knows nothing about the Hebrews or their God, other than they used to be slaves in Egypt. So when stuff is happening that's really out of the ordinary, it's great to see Chasisi seeing that, because we know that we're kind of like him. It's like, what's happening? You know what I mean? And that's kind of great. Also, to me, I don't know, it just so was such a funny concept to me that we just have this guy who just does not belong, but is trying to sneak through. And of course, you have Korah, who's a super curmudgeon type character who, naturally will be trying to figure out anything he can about this guy who's like
Yeah.
doesn't clearly does not fit in. You're like, why? What? I can't put my finger on it. But something does not add up about this guy. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it was super fun to me.
Moving on to production, what has been
Yeah.
some of the most difficult scenes to film? Because we know which ones were the most difficult scenes to write.
Yeah.
But were there any very hard filming days on set?
So many. So we filmed in St. George, Utah, which is awesome. St. George is
Hmm.
great, and the Utah Film Commission was fantastic to work with. It was awesome. But the problem with filming in the desert in America is
Mm.
that everywhere that is perfect for dunes, for red rocks, for just the desert aesthetic, generally is also a place where people like to drive their ATVs. It's like a great spot for people to kind of go off-roading, exploring. So many days on season one, we were just like, all right, wait a minute. We start to hear that like bumblebee sound. We're like,
Oh
oh no.
no.
And we just like, wait a minute. And sure enough, here comes the line of ATVs just like drive. They wouldn't go like through our set, but they'd go around it, and you're just, they're all looking at us and we're looking at them, you know? And then they finally get away and we're like, okay, great, let's film. And then airplane, because
Oh
again, these
no.
remote areas are also great to practice if you're learning to be a pilot. And so we were constantly between a rock and a hard place of just trying to find that peaceful spot that also worked for what we needed. It was a big challenge.
How involved were you with the casting of the characters? Because you wrote every character. Like, was
Yeah.
there somebody separate who casted it and was like, "What do you think of this? What do you think of this person?"
Yeah, so we had a casting director. We have Sunday Bowling and Meg Morman are our casting directors out of LA. They're awesome. But yeah, I mean, I directed all the episodes, so I was incredibly involved in all the casting. All of what's great about having a casting director is that they take all the auditions and they kind of
Mm.
filter them to be like, okay,
Mm.
we've seen the hundreds, so that you can see the tens more or less.
Mm.
And they would send me kind of the cream of the crop, and then I would watch them, call some back, get to know them a little bit, see if it was a good fit, and then cast from there. The challenge for casting this show is finding people that make sense for the world, right? We needed Middle Eastern actors because this is a Middle Eastern story. I know I couldn't do a Charlton Heston and just get the local white guy with a beard and he'd be like, "You're Moses." Like we wanted to be authentic with the casting. And then, of course, it's finding people who also get the show. They get the comedy of the show because lots of people want to be funny, but usually it doesn't work if you're trying to be funny. Usually what works is when you're trying to be real, and it happens to be that the circumstances and what we know about your character and just sometimes it's just literally your face is what makes it funny. You know what I mean? So it was a big process of that while we were casting the show.
Well, how long did it take for the Promised Land to cast all the characters?
Yeah, it took a little while for the pilot. It was a few weeks for season one. It was 8 weeks overall, like through the whole process. And what's challenging, is I still work on The Chosen because I want to finish it. There's one more season left. It's something that's very much near and dear to my heart. But it means that I was casting while we were on set for season five. So
Mm.
sometimes I would turn to some of the rest of the team would be like, "Hey, can you cover me for like an hour? I'm gonna go and sit in one of the trailers and do some casting for a little bit." And they were all super cool about helping me out with that. But yeah, it was quite a process. It took about 2 months.
What were some of the challenges for getting the funding for the show? Because this is a very big project,
Yeah.
but a lot of people don't get their shows actually funded to make a whole season, but yours did. So,
Yeah, thank the Lord. Yeah, it's crazy. It's so hard. It's so hard. You can have all the creativity, you can have all the great ideas in the world, but the money is the only thing that really makes it happen.
Mhm.
And we were fortunate for us that for the pilot, there are these two guys who believed in it, they understood it, and they were willing to kind of take the risk to finance us for what we needed for that. And then once the pilot was finished, yeah, the funding for the season kind of came through because of that other movie that I had done rewrites for, Still Hope. We were making that. We made that before we made season one of The Promised Land, before we'd even written season one. And this is actually also before the pilot had launched yet, right? But that was kind of funded by an individual who wanted to make films and have an impact. And then we were like, "Hey, you should also check out our pilot that we're finishing up. It's called The Promised Land. It's going to be great. Check
Mhm.
it out." And we were fortunate that he also understood it. He was like, "Okay, I can
Mm.
see what this is." I think the biggest obstacle to getting funding for something is being able to draw a line of like, we're going to make this thing
Mm.
and we're going to expect that these people will watch it. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to really know if anything is going to work,
Mhm.
especially when the bigger the swing, kind of the harder the funding in a lot of ways. And this shows a pretty big swing. Like doing Moses as a documentary and being funny is a big swing. However, there are a few things that kind of translate to a wider audience of it being faith related, the fact that it's about Moses and not Jesus means that it's a show for Christians and Jewish people, right? Like it's
Mm.
not specifically Christ centered. And so you kind of have that ability if people know about it. Also, it's a comedy. So you have people who are fans of comedy shows like The Office, you can kind of look at that and say, okay, every film investment is a gamble. However, there are people who watch this type of content, and I bet we can find them.
Mm.
And so far it's worked, which has been awesome. Thankfully, able to find people who said, "I see it, I like it, and I want to help you guys make it for better or worse." And that's kind of how we were able to do it.
What was the thought pattern behind putting it on YouTube. I might be wrong about this, but I think I was told that you did get a few offers from a few streaming platforms, but you're choosing to do it through YouTube.
Yeah, we got offers not from like the the biggest major streaming platforms or things like that, but we did get offers. Yeah, for us, when we released the pilot on YouTube, we wanted to have no barriers for people to check out the show.
Hmm.
It's a show that really relies on you kind of taking a chance because you hear it's Moses, but it's like The Office. Okay, you kind of need to see it to get it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Unless you're like a very imaginative kind of person. But so we knew we wanted to make the pilot available so that, hey, if you know nothing, you can just click on it and decide for yourself. You will know whether or not you like the show probably in the first 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, we're going to tell you everything about what the show is like. We have interviews, we have the camera work of a documentary, all that stuff. So we want it to be readily available to everyone. And then the reason why we're releasing season 1 on YouTube as well is because now that we've built this community of people who follow us on Instagram, who support us on YouTube, who've watched the pilot, we thought, hey, let's kind of feed this community first because they're already right there.
Hmm.
And I mean, YouTube as a whole is the most used streaming platform for people who are like
Mm.
18 to 25 to 30. Like it's the number one. And our show is really it's for everyone, but if there is a primary target, it's people in their 20s, 30s who've grown up with the Bible and know these stories.
Hmm.
And so we're like, hey, if they're on YouTube, let's go to where they are. I don't want to be behind a paywall, especially for this first season, when you could be like, hey, just go check it out. Make a choice for yourself if this is for you or not. So that was kind of our decision-making process. We want to go where the people are.
Has there been any difficulties in like promoting the show, like in terms of getting it widespread advertising?
No, you know what's crazy? For all of the promotions that we did for the pilot, for most of what we've done thus far for season 1, we haven't basically spent any money on
Wow.
the
Yeah.
promotion of the show, which is nuts. But we've just been using social media and I mean, really just social media kind of to our advantage. It was a fully organic campaign for the pilot just to get that word out. It was all just we put out clips and people liked them, so they
Mm.
shared it with other people. And that kind of grassroots approach has been huge for us. And again, is it supports that idea of YouTube because YouTube is like very much kind of for the people. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It was weird that the word spread the way that it did because honestly, I'm sure most people who are filmmakers have tried to make things and put them on YouTube and see, hey, let's see if people are going to watch them, and you're like, we made it to 500 views, or whatever. And it's hard to build that audience, if the algorithm is not supporting it. And somehow it just kind of worked in our favor. And I think that a lot of it was God's provision, but we
Right.
just happened to, I think, touch on something that people related to.
Sometimes in The Chosen, they have it where you can be an extra on the show. Is that going to be an
Yeah.
option for the Promised Land at any point?
Yeah, so we actually for season 1 we had a big extras event where we had hundreds of people come out and they were in St. George, Utah with us and they were there for basically the tabernacle ceremony was kind of the event. It was like come be a part of the tabernacle opening. And man, it was so cool. It was so exciting to just see all these people. I knew a lot of them because of The Chosen, some of the same background actors decided to come out and help me out on this, which was so cool and so kind of them. But yeah, we did a big event like that for season 1 and it was really, really special. Let me ask you guys a question. So you guys
Sure.
have seen the show. How did you guys first find out about the show, and what is it that made you like it?
Oh boy, let me tell you. It was the same exact moment. I was like, man, I love The Chosen, but I cannot binge it. Like it's heavy and I'm not big into binging drama. I
Right.
love comedy. And I
Same.
was thinking, I was like, what if there's got to be a Christian comedy, based on the Bible? And I looked it up and The Promised Land popped up and it was like
Let's go. The
it was
algorithm is working.
probably, yeah, and it was like divine timing because the pilot episode didn't come out until about a month.
Hmm.
It was something like that. So I was just watching clips and I was so ecstatic. I even told my coworker and I literally went upstairs into the break room. I watched that first pilot. I
Oh,
fell
let's
in
go.
love with it. I
Oh,
love it.
awesome. Thanks, dude. That's awesome. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I love that.
My friend Galilee was visiting like for my birthday weekend, and we just
Yeah.
that's what I watched for my birthday. And it
Dude, no
was
kidding.
yeah, and it was so funny. We cracked up. I remember we specifically laughed when you introduced Miriam, and it just said woman.
Woman.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I was so caught off guard. I
Yeah.
was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
But
so glad.
yes,
Love to hear that.
Mitch, it was so great having you on the show. God bless you, man.
Thanks,
Yeah, God
dude. I
bless.
appreciate it. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Josh. Great to
Yeah,
meet you
thank
guys.
you.
Thanks for having me on your show.